Welcome everyone to Awesome Truth, a wrestling book club. I'm your host, Steve Semino, and with me as always is my co-host, Walt Schwenk. Hey, Walters.
Hello, Steven. How's it going?
My friend, it is going very well. We are back on Awesome Truth, and we are dipping into YouTube documentaries again. I don't know, I forget how we defined the last episode that was like this, Walt. I don't know what we finally settled on calling it. A clip show? A docu? Do you remember what we summed it up as?
Uh, Video pieces?
It's a series of video pieces, more centered this time, just one longer video piece as opposed to, 5 25 to 30-minute ones, which I liked. Of course, I'm talking about Better Than You, the documentary, the cut-together overview of the CM Punk MJF feud. It's from the YouTube channel Outside Interference, which we covered very recently on the podcast in a previous episode, available in our archives, awesometruth.libsyn.com. It's The Good, the Bad, and the Elite was the initial episode in this series by this Outside Interference channel, and that covered Adam Page and Kenny Omega, their feud. And Outside Interference is back again with another video, this time talking about Punk and MJF, which is certainly one of the biggest feuds of the year, and I would say worthy of this sort of coverage.
Yeah, once we watched and came across the Good and Bad and the Elite, we just pounded the subscribe button. I'm like, please give me more of this shit.
And we wanted the Cody episode. We were all excited on this recording. On an episode, we saw it was coming, and we got all pumped. And then, of course, Cody had to up and leave, and I think that changed the whole game of the idea of doing a Cody episode of this show.
I still want to see that Cody episode, though, because there's a lot to unwrap there. Well, I don't even want to say unwrap because, like, to your point, we're not really making commentary on it. We're just presenting the facts of the case as is. And the promos unedited, and, well, there's, like, music edits, and, it's just, like, to fill the void of silence when CM Punk is talking for 4 straight minutes. It's like, yeah, I personally like a little music to kind of really set the stage a little more, but ultimately, that's where we started, which was, we're going to get this whole potentially multiple part retrospective on Cody Rhodes, and then we got 45 minutes of CM Punk and MJF, which no one's complaining here.
No, it was a welcome surprise when this came out. Came out a month ago, and when I realized we could do an episode on it, because like most people listening to this podcast, I presume if you're an Awesome Truth fan, I imagine you watch AEW. This seems like those are probably two concentric circles. I watched the pay-per-view match between CM Punk and MJF at AEW Revolution, the dog collar match, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good match. That was an interesting card. There was maybe too many good matches. It was, people are still trying to dissect exactly what about it wasn't perfect, though it seemed like it should be perfect on paper. This was, I guess, a match that sort of falls in that same vein. It was a very good match. It was the culmination of a feud that I was somewhat aware of, and I thought they, did all the things I sort of expected them to do. It was very good. It was very well done. They're both great personalities. They're both solid in the ring. It was, 3.75 stars. Like, hooray, 2 thumbs mostly up. Watching this documentary, though, watching them talk about this whole feud, break it down in detail and show us all these conversations, I don't think it was the greatest feud I've ever seen, but for packing something into, 2-3 months and hitting on the high spots and certainly reintroducing CM Punk, back into wrestling in 2021, 2022 against, maybe the top heel going, I think it was a great example, I think, of really condensing it into a small package, but hitting all those high spots and really making it count and memorable and something I think we'll all look back on and say that was really, really well executed.
Yeah, and when CM Punk came back, you started circling the names on the roster, and I don't think anyone would be surprised if MJF was one of those names in one of those circles because of just his master of the mic. And yeah, he is the biggest heel possibly in the company and possibly in wrestling, depending on who you talk to. And I think they had a pretty great cerebral feud that led to satisfying wrestling matches. And like, what more could you really ask for? I mean, yeah, I agree with your rating. 3.75 feels right. I guess I don't know if you're rating just the dog collar or the whole package,
That was the
but
dog collar rating, to be fair. That was to
okay,
clarify.
right. Because but ultimately though, it's like, that was an A, and I got most of what I would have wanted from these two, including not that I like crave insider terminology, but like the first few really did set up a lot of fun things, but referencing WWE obviously and ROH and UFC and other acronyms that I'm not going to get into, but you know, so I mean, like, yeah, this was a great initial feud for CM Punk's return, and it got after 45 minutes, I was reminded how much like how much content this bought us from a week to week basis.
Yeah, I mean, that's the best thing about these outside interferences, because I think we said on the Good, the Bad, and the Elite episode, we're not every week watchers of Dynamite, of Rampage. Like we just don't sit down and give it the 3 hours a week that some people do. So we were admirers. We like it. Like we just don't consume it on a weekly basis. So to see all the beats laid out, like outside interference does with all these feuds, it really does show you how well AEW is working on a very infrastructure-y type level. Like how well they're laying the foundation for these things. Like how well they're making every week seem different a little bit. Like because this feud was very similar in terms of like if you're hitting the bullet points. Like they come out, MJF makes fun of UFC, makes fun of WWE, Punk sort of fires back, and they just sort of have conversations back and forth. Wardlow gets involved, Spears gets involved. Like it's not very exciting on paper, and obviously these are two guys who are great on the microphone and can turn nothing into something very easily. But to see, the turn down handshake that is very early in the feud where MJF puts his hand on Punk, walks away, knowing like, oh, this guy's a bad guy, like screw him, I'm not going to shake his hand. And then the idea that starts some resentment in MJF's head that in some way leads to what he does later. Obviously, also because he is a bad guy, so he's going to make bad guy decisions. But how much is he sort of stung by that, and it leads to all the events that come? How much is Punk sort of an asshole still too? Like, is Punk really a good guy? Is he a babyface, or is he a guy the fans like who is still sort of a dick, but we excuse it because he's a legend and he's back, and we're all so excited to see him again? Like they touched on, I'd say, all those elements. Some subtly, some sort of implicitly, and some just came out, they straight out and said it. And I think like it's not like reinventing the wheel, it's not groundbreaking stuff, but the AEW is really good. I think like understanding you need to get from A to B to C to D. Like you need to, if you lay that foundation, if you put that little bit of work in, it just makes the story that much better.
Yeah, and thank you for reminding all of us that. Yeah, the beginning of this wasn't revolutionary either. It was just Punk was there and then walked away, and like, but it also proves that like you don't need anything. Like no one, like outside of rewatching all this in the outside interference piece, like I forgot that's how it started because there's so many story points that happen along the way and matches too. So it's like, it's just funny how like, wow, how simple this started and how like where we took it is like it's hard to retrace it.
It doesn't have to be like Punk steals the ring or MJF says a mean thing about his wife. Like it can be just like two characters interact one day and they get mad at each other and that builds for 6 weeks and then they have a pay-per-view match. Like that's if you do it right, that's a fine way to go with things.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like a lot of CM Punk's initial feuds where it's like, I want to wrestle Darby because I respect Darby and I want to see who's better. It's like, that's all you really need in a wrestling storyline, at least to start.
And you believe, because, CM Punk, the character, would, if he was as a wrestler, would come to this promotion and say, I want to fight your guys. Like, I haven't fought guys in a while. Like, who is around? Like, I believe that just like you said, we want him to do this, the character would want to do that too. Like, he would just be interested to see how he matches up against these young guys. Like, it is very logical in that way too.
Yeah, and also too, it's a reminder, just like and Brian,
Brian Maxwell, right? Mann.
Right. So I always think it's
the man
Max,
behind outside interference.
I always say Max Maxwell Bryan. And I'm like, wait, no, it's double name, first name. I have to switch it. Um, but no, Bryan does a good job of like pulling like archival clips from like the first 5 minutes are like masterful in a sense of like kind of just giving you a snapshot of both guys' careers leading up to like this encounter, this first encounter that leads to their program. It's like you forget that like MJF uses the same terminology that Punk uses, and when you get later in the feud, you realize like that might not be an accident. That maybe he was drawing from CM Punk's like promos when MJF was like doing promos in MLW or wherever like before it, and even in AEW, he would. So like the more you watch, the more you realize like, oh, the better than you moniker isn't just like something CM Punk was saying and something that was said. Like this is something that has deeper meaning than that, and it's like you don't really notice that until you revisit all this in the first 5 minutes of this like 45-minute piece.
Yeah, the footage they used, which I'm sure AEW used in some elements as well, because now they own ROH, so they have access to all these things. But seeing it laid out the way this particular video did was great, because it reminds you a couple things about Punk that are great. Like I said, the aforementioned like Punk was a huge asshole and still has big asshole energy about him that hasn't dissipated, even though he's older and wiser and a little chiller. Still a big dick. Like I think everyone would agree on that, and it was good that they brought that back to the forefront of this. And also, it showed you, like, the MJF character is, like, this suck-up kind of guy. Like, he wants to be a wrestler real bad. He used the terminology, and Punk used it because, like, Punk had a chip on his shoulder. MJF uses it because MJF wants to prove to everyone that he belongs here. I think there's a light distinction between the two, but I think a legitimate one. Like Punk always had like a vibe of just like fuck you all, I hate you. Well, MJF seems like though he's mean and sort of surly and kind of a dick, he to a lot of people, he also like has like the Rosie clip is so great that they use in this, where he hugs Rosie O'Donnell, because you're like, this little kid just wanted to be a wrestler so bad, and part of that still reflects in his character, that he kicks you in the nuts and pins you because he's not bigger than you, and because he knows he has to do that to get the win. Like there's something that fuels him of just this need to prove himself amongst the people. Well, Punk wanted to tear the door down and like cause a whole big scene. MJF is a little sneakier and a little more conniving, but still has that sense of I need to win this match. I need to talk better than you. I need to show everyone that I'm as good or better, because I'm a scared little boy still, and that's the only way I know to get ahead.
Yeah, that Rosie O'Donnell clip is the ultimate chef's kiss of like whoever.
To start with it was such a great idea too. It was perfect.
Like I don't know how AEW resists not using that as more like because I think CM Punk, and correct me if I'm wrong, CM Punk references the Rosie O'Donnell.
He does.
Rosie O'Donnell at some point, but like I don't think they ever showed that clip on TV.
I can't say because I don't watch every week, but I was not aware of it in such a little, like I've never seen it before, and I might have heard about it, but this is the first time I've ever come across it. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's a strategic advantage of being able to tell the story on your YouTube page that's not affiliated with these things. Right. You get around licensing and stuff, which for me in the viewing experience, bringing it back to like the forum and the medium that we watched this on, it was actually made it better because you can reference those things and not have to worry about the nonsense producing part of it. But I will also say though that the CM Punk, like this should be a CTA or PSA, whatever you want to call it, for all wrestlers who are aspiring wrestlers. Always keep your pictures with wrestlers, because you never know when it's going to be the focal point of an entire storyline.
Yep.
And that's so great, like that they were able to use this like and reference this like this meeting like as if like whether or not they actually like it was a meaningful meet and greet or whatever, like obviously I can imagine it wasn't, but like this picture has of those two from 15 however many years ago has so much meaning now, and they created a whole narrative around it that like I don't know how this goes without that visual, but like that is just so paramount to being able to tell this story.
Oh, it's great. It's almost amazing that it could happen. Like, I know Punk is older and MJF is really young, but I hadn't realized like that was even a possibility. That Punk could have still been wrestling while MJF was still young enough to want a picture with a wrestler. Like, I did not put two and two together that way until I saw it, and then it's great. Like, it's like you said, even if they're hamming it up for this particular storyline, the influence that Punk did have on MJF in whatever way. Was he his favorite wrestler? Was he his 12th favorite wrestler? Who cares? Like, it's such a good visual element of this whole thing. And it really it adds the layer of doubt that is so good in this story, too. Like, about Punk being a jerk. MJF maybe having a moment there at some point in his past where he could have been a good guy or like could be a good guy again eventually. Like, he's such a good heel, but I'm sure at some point they will try and turn him face, and I think that's something he'll probably rely on at that point. Is like, love wrestling. This guy is like a wrestler. Like, he cheats and he's a butthole, but he really wants to be out there in the worst possible way, and he's wanted to be out there forever, and he's worked really hard, and he's really small, and he probably shouldn't be out there, but he makes it work anyway. Like, it's such a good way to show these two guys and give them, like you said, that deeper connection that really makes this 6 weeks feud have way more weight to it than it would be if it was just two other unrelated guys who just happened to be good talkers and talked for a while and then had a match.
Right, because I mean, we've seen this in WWE where like Roman will face Cena for the next pay-per-view, and then they'll just like cut like insider promos on each other, and it's just like, whoa, they're really talking at each other, but like this doesn't really do anything beyond just making you feel like these people hate each other to then have a fake fight. Like, so in those and that's just like one of probably many that I can't think of off the top of my head, but like I think you nailed something that's really important here. Is like throughout the course of this story, this multiple match storyline, feud, if you will.
What's the word for this?
I don't know why I'm saying more words than I need to. But ultimately, it's like you've sowed so many seeds for like MJF's future, like talking about how they're both outsiders and flexing on or leaning on this whole like anti-Semitism that he experienced in his youth. Like, it's and this almost took me out of it in certain points. I'm curious to hear your take of like that pivot halfway through this feud where they started talking about like MJF and made him more sympathetic. But it's just like, you have so much fodder to work with if you were to ever turn this guy babyface, because he's kind of organically giving you these nuggets of truth, and I assume they're true. I don't know why they wouldn't be, but like just this, there's character motivation now, and you understand this in a way where a slight tweak and a slight pivot, you don't kick CM Punk in the balls the next week and suddenly you're full-on babyface. It's like, this did a lot for the future of MJF in addition to just building to a really good match.
Yeah, and he's lucky that he's in a promotion that takes time to remember this shit, that like actually will store in the back of their heads, like, okay, in February MJF cut a sympathetic promo and turned out to be somewhat of a ruse, but like you said, there's clearly truth to it. Like, and they didn't have him say like, I made it all up, Punk, like I'm a mastermind. Like, he just said, I'm a snake. Like, but what does that mean? Does that mean you pulled something out of your ass and used it to your momentary advantage? Does that mean you are all-encompassingly bad? Like, I think it's they're going for the former. Like, he did something that to get an edge on his opponent, to pull the wool over his eyes and kick him in the balls and beat him up one more time. But he said it and he meant it, and like, outsider is a great word for it. Like, that's how they should present him when the time comes to do that. Like, they should summon this kind of stuff, and they should talk about how he's the kind of guy who was treated like shit for so long, and built an edge and built a persona to get himself ahead. But remembers those moments, and lots of the audience will certainly remember that as well, and I think it really will work. But to your other point, though, of like the timing, I think, of all this and how they laid it all out there, like, it's gonna go somewhere really well, because there's so much going on now too. Like, this is getting ahead of it a little bit. I don't want to go on this tangent too hard, but the Wardlow element is prominently displayed in this, because the Wardlow story became entwined with this story, and it led to now the Wardlow babyface term, which is going amazingly well. And like, MJF is playing like a full-on heel now against the full-on babyface Wardlow, ducking him, doing all the conniving, hiding shit. Like, it's great, and like that added on storyline, that twisty element would not have worked if the Punk MJF story wasn't going so well. You know, like, it just worked perfectly. Like, it gave Wardlow a spotlight in a feud that wasn't really about him at all, but there was a clear moment where he was able to finally do his thing and sort of break free from his master, and like, it's just and then you seamlessly move to the next thing, you know? And like, and if you want to loop back to this someday, you can do that too. Like, it's just such good layered storytelling, and it makes new stars, not just MJF but Wardlow, and Punk intimately involved in all of it. Like, it's just very impressive. Like, it's the kind of thing that's, again, it's not hard, but it does require some thought and some planning and some strategy, you know, which is something that other big promotions do not focus on or excel at a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone was really shocked when Wardlow turned. I mean, we were all kind of waiting for it, even like back before. Oh God, what is the group? The Pinnacle. Sorry, wow.
Yeah, I forgot that. I couldn't have helped you if I wanted to.
When they formed the Pinnacle, everyone was like, "Oh, this guy's gonna turn," and you know, like, and that was like almost like, I guess 10 months ago, 8 months. I don't even remember how long ago it was. But I'm also curious if Wardlow was doing the multiple power bombs before, to like the squash matches that kind of built him up and the fans go nuts for, which I think is a very recent thing. Like, I don't think he was doing that before the Punk match where he gave him like 9 power bombs, or maybe he was, but like, I feel like that was like such a big stage where like they really introduced like, this guy's thing is just gonna power bomb you to death.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. And now that's really his thing. And I believe he just finished off Lance Archer with like 4 power bombs. Like, it's like, that's his finish. It's like, he's going to just keep going until you can't move.
Yep.
But all of that is to say is like, you know, using this feud to kind of pass the baton to that next feud. That, again, like, we were all waiting for it, but like, I don't know when you get a better moment than kind of after like months of this kind of storytelling with these two characters, you know, fueled with personal vendettas and just real emotions, I guess, to the call back to the pivot of MJF's that one promo. It's like, you know, there's obviously that immediate future planning, but God, if the multiple power bombs on CM Punk was a thing that they introduced to kind of test that and became a new thing, like that kind of, Wardlow benefited from so many different parts of this, not just like, oh, now he's feuding with MJF. It's like, now you have a real star potentially feuding with MJF.
And he doesn't become CM Punk's friend or CM Punk's heater, you know? Like, it was unrelated to that, really. Like, it was only related because that was the feud going on currently when Wardlow decided to do his thing. Like, I think that's another underrated element of storytelling, is to have these parallel narratives that intersect when they need to, but do not need to, like, it didn't become weeks of, like, you know, Wardlow and CM Punk team up to face MJF and Spears. Like, no one wanted that. They didn't do that. Like, that wasn't what this was. Like, it's a totally separate thing. It's a longer, slower burn story that they moved to without diminishing the telling of the initial story that was going on. Like, it's I'm just always very impressed by it. Like, and we always talk about the low standards we hold for so much wrestling. You know, like, you just execute, and we're just like crying because we're so satisfied. You know, like, you didn't make us cry or turn the channel in disgust, and so we are lavishing praise upon you.
Yeah, it's like WWE. It's like, oh, let's forget what happened last week, and you two are bad. Let's just team you. It's like, no, let's not forget that. Actually, that's important. We remember it, and you know, I think we like to. I like to think that I have a say in the matter as a consumer that doesn't consume, that doesn't pay really, but you know, but not to be like an AEW sycophant where everything that happened in this feud was immaculate either.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do want to go back and talk about that MJF promo where he's becoming sympathetic, and part of me enjoys that in hindsight. And rewatching this piece on Outside Interference, like also enjoyed it for what it was, but like I felt jarring to see that side of MJF come out and without immediate explanation, and I'm just part of me remembered that took me out of the feud a little bit, and part of me also was like, maybe this is going on too long if we're taking a giant detour like this.
Yeah, it definitely feels like the kind of thing that is better consumed the way we watch this video, like where we see every twist and turn, you see it sort of trimmed down a little bit, cut together. There's the pauses between weeks are gone, so you get right to the next thing. So you see that it's all a ruse and he kicks him in the balls. Like it definitely works better when you see it as a whole. Like I definitely think I'm not surprised at all that it's seemed real and genuine and like a babyfacey moment for him at the time. Because it's like what else are you supposed to say when someone's talking about being beaten up and describes his trials and tribulations and being Jewish and being hated upon and feeling like an outsider and feeling not loved. Like it's hard not to get behind that person. But MJF at the same time, as we were saying, is your most heel-y character, maybe the most pure heel in the whole business. Like surely at this point the most heel who is not going to turn babyface anytime soon. Like if Kenny Omega played a dick for a year, if he goes out and does a cool thing one week, everyone's cheering him again, like it's turning Kenny Omega back to a babyface was very, very doable. Like Chris Jericho is a heel, but everyone still loves Chris Jericho. Like again, he could switch again on it. He has been switching on a dime for the last year anyway when he needs to. Like MJF was the kind of guy you didn't think that was going to happen. And as we said, I'm intrigued to see when someone finally does pull that trigger, how it goes. I think it'll go pretty well based on some of these things we're talking about. But yeah, but seeing it in the middle of this good guy, bad guy feud, seemingly at the time, it added some gray to it that I don't know if that was exactly in the moment what it needed. Like, it's interesting. I'm glad they tried it. I don't think it hurt the feud, but I think it did feel a little bit like wheel spinning, and it felt a little like there's like a to be continued element to it where I really hope that what happens with Punk now going forward, maybe this bleeds into that a little bit. Like Punk did a shitty thing to MJF. It was a small thing, but a shitty thing. It kicked off their feud. He won. He vanquished his enemy. But now, does he bring some of that shittiness with him to the Hangman feud that is about to begin, or the Hangman match that's coming up in a month? Like, does that resonate, or is this just sort of, like you said, was that just sort of a bit of gray they chucked in to kill one more week before the pay-per-view?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have an answer, to be honest. Because
none of us do, and like I guess we can just cross our little fingies that there's a, if not a plan, that if they can find a use for it somewhere down the line.
Right, or like I said, if this was all to like help put a promo together later to help sell MJF as a face,
yeah.
And we're using this kind of like Rosie O'Donnell, and then you juxtapose it with Rosie O'Donnell, and suddenly now we have like the biggest babyface in the company. I don't know, maybe. Just spitballing here, but it did kind of take me out of it, and I'm not gonna like. It did make me ask those questions like, is this too much? Is this program going on too long? And so, in ways where I've kind of felt similarly with MJF Jericho, where it's like this like 4-act play when really it should have been 3. So I don't know. I mean but just not to say that everything AEW does is like bulletproof and amazing. A lot of it is simple, and that means it's good and it's straightforward. It's A to B to C, and that's we it's familiar but surprising, and that usually leads to enjoyable content. But sometimes they do stuff like this, and I'm like, I don't know if I would have done that. It's a little interesting.
I mean, that makes me think of, the presentation of this particular video, too. Is, as we said, the good, the bad, and the elite was 5 parts. It was certainly a longer feud, a longer story, and I'm glad they split it up that way. There were cliffhangers, there were twists and turns. Like, I think Brian, when Outside Interference put it out there, I was happy to see it cut up in that particular way. I was glad at the same time this was just one episode. It didn't need, there was no clear demarcation point where it needs to be 2 parts. There's no, just give it to us in whole. Like, it was a good feud. It lends itself to this sort of format. Like, it's a lot of good conversations that it's great to see cut together, but don't belabor it. Don't make it seem more epic than it was. It was not particularly epic. It was just very well executed. It was 2 great talkers, older guy, younger guy, mush them both together, see what happens. And I think it is deserving of 45 minutes. Anything more or any sort of different treatment, I feel like might not have been as warranted.
Yeah, I agree too. I think 1 is more than enough. But that being said, the creative dictates the presentation, not the presentation doesn't dictate the creative. And in the case of Hangman and Kenny Omega, that was a years-long storyline. And when we did see twists and turns in Hangman and his presentation and flirting with going dark and light and juggling, was he elite? Is he not elite? Is he bad? Is he good? That all adds up. And that was years of it, of taking these pivots, going to Dark Order and, partnering X, Y, and Z people. It's like that all made for a really good 5-part story.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you're right. I don't even know what, even thinking about the Cody example of it, that could have been a good 3+ parter because of all the roller coaster ride that he went through at AEW. But even then, I'm not sure what the overall story is.
Yeah. There's an episode about Anthony Ogogo, and you're like, what? I don't know if I want to watch the Anthony Ogogo episode.
No, I don't. I would hope that one was kind of buried for reasons I won't get into. But I would have been interested to see how many parts that was too, because I don't know. That's a little bit more what is the overall Cody story, revisiting all that. It's oh yeah, we did come from start there and now go to here. It's yeah, in this case though, this was a clear 45-minute max.
Yes. I will say too, as we're saying negative things about AEW or pointing out that they're not sacrosanct, one thing that I did notice about this compared to the Hangman Omega feud or any number of other feuds that have sort of a different presentation, I really love Hangman and Kenny and those guys, and the Bucks too. They're weirdos, they're not macho. When Kenny's playing macho, he comes off like a guy who's a nerd who is doing his impression of a macho guy. When he had that weird sideburns and just his whole you're this guy. This is just Kenny Omega cosplaying a macho guy. He's not real. This feud, especially when you see it in this format, is a lot of CM Punk calling him a bitch, MJF calling him they said bitch 5 times in this, and that's fine. I get there's only so many ways to insult your opponent. I don't take offense to that term in the least. But it just feels like a lot of the feud was centered on stuff like that. Oh, you're on Rosie O'Donnell, you little bitch. Yeah, well, you abandoned it. You took your ball and went home, you little bitch. And I was all right, it's fine. It's perfectly acceptable to do that, but it's not exactly my type of feud. It's not exactly my type of promo. I like a little weirder. I like a little sillier. I like a little more genuine, even maybe the stuff with Hangman and the Dark Order. I like people becoming friends. I'm that's a sweet reason to fight your enemies is to defend your friends. Just someone calling you a bitch and you get mad and you have a fight. I'm just I don't know. That doesn't always do it for me. It's certainly the length this feud went on is probably the amount of time I want to see 2 guys doing that before I sort of tune out and move on.
Yeah, and also a good thing to note with regards to the good, bad, and the elite versus better than you is all of the being the elite segments that they pulled from. That'll get you to 5 parts pretty quickly.
That's true. And that's got all the weirdness and silliness that, I was saying, that I, though I'm not a watcher of that show, I know they lean heavily on that stuff that I personally find very entertaining.
I think at some point you and I have to cover that series
Yeah,
just because
just watch
we don't watch
200
it.
episodes.
We just pick episode one. We're programming live on right now. We'll pick episode one, pick episode 100, pick episode 200, and then see like what is,
Yeah.
as a viewer who doesn't watch this regularly, what does this mean and how does this work?
It's actually a pretty good idea. I like that. Yeah, like try and connect based on what we know outside from the book and from everything. Like, okay, how do they get from here to here to here?
But I digress, though. That's,
Yeah.
I mean, clearly the CM Punk MJF feud was all on Dynamite and maybe some, what's the other show?
Rampage. I couldn't remember Rampage. I was gonna call it Thunder. I was like, it's not Thunder.
God. Oh God. Yeah,
it is sort of Thunder, but it's also not Thunder.
Yeah, it's more like Worldwide and Thunder. But not in a bad way.
So I'll ask you this, Walt. Like, as you know, as you said, this was the first big Punk feud. Like, he's done some stuff, Eddie Kingston and Darby. Like, this was the big sort of return to form feud. What do you think about Punk in AEW so far? Like, he's about to have a title match. It feels pretty warranted. Like, I think it. I don't know what they're gonna do. Babyface. That's all sort of being laid out as we're recording. Are you enjoying it so far? Does it meet your expectations? Did you have expectations? Like, where do you come down on at this point?
I enjoy it. I think he's a star. I mean, if anything, this feud reinforced like this guy belongs in wrestling. Like, what the hell were we doing for 10 years, whatever? And he works well in the ring, and he looks great, and he works well with younger talent, older talent. Like, he looks like he's having fun. Like, that's what's going to ultimately net you great results from a performer like him. And, you know, I think this, where we've gone and where we've come from was logical leading up to where we're going, which is he's going to be fighting for the title. And, like, you know, his biggest gripe was not being the number one guy for the last pro wrestling gig he had. And, like, now he has a chance to, like, be AEW's like bannerman and champion, and in a way that like Bryan Danielson is not doing. And I want to make that clear because they both are very similar, and there's something very different about Punk that he's bringing that is like you're not getting from a Bryan Danielson per se, but when Punk wins, it's going to mean something different, I guess. I don't know. Like, to me, I'm trying to keep those two separate because like they're very similar and it's hard to like separate them. But Punk just gives you something different.
Yeah, it's impossible not to compare Danielson and Punk at this point, given their arrivals at essentially the same time, given and given how they're. And this isn't compare. I guess this is just how they're being positioned now is so interesting because Punk is getting a title match, as you said. Danielson is part of a stable having 6-man tags, and seemingly it just what I get from watching his matches and his angles is he's decided I want to have bangers where I beat the shit out of people and sort of just wrestle and fuck around. Like, I don't need the belt, I don't need main events, I don't need any of that shit. Like, I just want to be a guy. Like, I want to be a really cool guy who has a good time out there, and hangs out with my buddies William Regal and John Moxley, and now Wheeler Utah, which is fascinating. Like, I didn't, I know there's not room at the top for everybody, and like AEW has been criticized in the last couple of months for being too deep and how they don't have time for all these guys they're paying contracts to on roster. They can't fit them all, into the matches quick enough. But I understand why they're doing that, and Danielson willingly taking that back seat, presumably, certainly helps them out of that bind. Is like, okay, now Punk gets his time, and like you got to make time for the young guys. Like we don't know the inner workings why they're all doing it, but Punk does seem like the character, the character of CM Punk on the show seems actively interested in facing everybody and going for the titles and like being good at AEW, whereas Bryan Danielson feels like he's just happy to be there, in terms of fucking around and having a good time. So it's a weird dichotomy there.
I was gonna say, Bryan Danielson feels like he wants to be in the G1 and like. Yeah. He got hot-shotted, and now it's like, I just want to, I want to put on bangers.
Yeah. It was cool to come out and, like, get all the big praise and, like, fuck around with all the guys there in my intro, but now I've just settled into a wonderful little role that we all enjoy. I'm enjoying it so far a lot, but it's just weird to see him in a stable, just is not where I thought that was going to go.
Yeah, right. I'm super fascinated to see how it goes. I'm curious though. The final question I have for you is who comes out of, I guess it was Double or Nothing
Hmm.
when CM Punk challenges Hangman.
I mean, I'm very curious if they're just gonna do babyface, and just like make it a match, or if they're gonna turn Punk heely. Like I said, there's elements in this of Punk's heelish persona came out. Like they certainly MJF was bad enough. They really didn't go into that in any detail. But I will say, just to loop back to Better Than You, to the video, it ends in a very foreboding way. It ends with a Punk promo from a long time ago where he's yelling and fired up, and it just sort of like fades to black after that. And I was like very like, well, I was like, wow, what a weird, like, it doesn't end with like Punk being triumphant, having defeated MJF. It ends with like a like what's going to happen next to this guy, and I don't, and obviously Brian Maxwell Mann doesn't know any more than we do about what's happening next, but I couldn't help watch that and think about this Hangman match and be like, are they gonna? I sort of think they have to make Punk the heel, right? Like heel-y. Like at some point, the joy of seeing CM Punk in AEW is going to fade, and they're going to have to do more with him. And the logical next step is to make him a shit-talking bad guy. So I'm not sure if they're ready to do that just yet, but I feel like they got to start laying the groundwork, and I guess they're going to start laying the groundwork in a title match build, which will be, I'm not sure how that's going to go, but I'm intrigued to see what the path's going to be like to get there.
Yeah, and just like the recency of Better Than You premiering on Outside of Interference, like it feels like in real life too, the Good and Bad and the Elite feels like forever ago, and
Yes.
the Hangman coronation feels like I think we're due for like something new.
So you
Not
think
that
you
I
think
don't like
Hangman's going to lose then, would be your guess?
I'm not. I don't know. I mean, like feeding Brian to him, Brian Danielson,
Mm-hmm.
and feeding a few other people along the way made sense. But like, I don't think feeding Punk to Hangman makes sense. Just I think it's Punk's time to like fight with the big bads
It's a
and see what
weird
happens.
fit too. Like I just don't know what the whole. And I know Hangman has COVID now as we record this, so he missed the show last night.
That
And
explains that.
we're dating it, but he missed the recent Dynamite as we're recording this because he's got COVID, so he's out for a little bit at least. So I don't know how that's going to disrupt the plans, but I just don't know how they're going to interact. Like they're two characters don't. I can't picture them talking to each other, Like, as much as I enjoy Hangman and everything he's done, like, is Punk just going to make him feel small and shitty? Like, is he going to realize he has this psychological advantage because Hangman is, an anxious millennial cowboy and starts poking that open wound? Like, that just makes the most sense to me, Like, I don't know if they're going to. But also, they could certainly, have this match and they don't have to end it here. Like, it could be the beginning of something bigger. Kenny's going to be back soon. Like, who knows? Like, they have a lot of guys. And, like, I sort of hope that what they're doing is bigger than just Hangman versus Punk, Like, I would like to see Punk involved in more than just one-on-one feuds. Like, I'm not saying I don't want him to join a stable or anything. Like, I don't need to see him face Dark Order
No.
necessarily, but I just feel like there's a lot to do with CM Punk where it's more than just CM Punk faces a wrestler because he wants to have a match.
I mean, I don't know if he'd face the Dark Order ever
Because
because
of
Cole
Cole.
Cabana might just
They're
waffle.
gonna have to put them in the same ring at some point, right? Like, I just feel like they're gonna, or at least have them interact in some way.
They haven't yet. But
Yeah, that's true.
There's plenty of time.
I assume they're in the locker room together, so they must be somewhat at ease with each other. But I don't know.
I don't know. It's a great question.
But yeah, I'm like you said, the thing about Punk that I take away from all this, like, he's been perfectly good since he got back, and he's really the star they need. Like, he's just, you can't deny that. Like, he's a name. Everybody who is like, he's not like obviously at Rock, Cena, Batista levels of fame with normos, but he's a guy that most people, if you know wrestling, if you know MMA, if you're anywhere near this universe, you've heard the name CM Punk, and so that's a guy they really needed, and I think I would give him like a solid B plus A minus since they got him. Like, he hasn't been the best guy. He hasn't like blown everyone away, but he's done everything you could possibly ask of him. Like, you can't really. I would say A minus even. Like, A plus is just like, obviously he comes in and just revolutionizes the company. That hasn't happened, but he's done everything they've asked him to do and more. And like, I think you can't fault him for that at all.
Yeah, I mean, right now, I look at the landscape. He's their biggest star.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just
Yeah.
if you can define star power, but like he just feels like he's the biggest star,
Yeah.
and
He,
that usually deserves a title.
And he
But
feels like he can do this stuff like with MJF, as good as it was, it feels like he can do it in his sleep. And I feel like maybe that's why we ding it a little bit and say 3.75, or we say, like,
I didn't say 3.75.
well, that's fine. Maybe that's why I ding it a little bit, because it's just, we've seen it before and he's so good at it that I get a little complacent. I'm just like, oh, cool, it's Punk. And, even MJF, same type of thing. Like, he's so good at talking and so good at, having great promos that I sort of, they run together in a way that is probably unfair to him, because he is one of the best at it. And, just because I've seen it before doesn't mean it's still not very good.
Right. No, that's fair.
Yep.
I didn't mean to ding your.
No, you're right. I shouldn't put words in your mouth. I say, well, Walt and I, a united front, clearly give this.
I would say in the treat or not treat meter, this was a treat.
The video was a treat. Outside interference has been a treat. The feud was a treat. The match was a treat. Like, it all was pretty good. Like, it was. Like you said, I'd rather see Cody just because there's a little more meat on that bone in terms of like ups and downs. But for a 45-minute video about a very recent feud, like, there was a lot there, and I really enjoyed putting it together. And the skill in which Brian, cuts it all together, and like with the Cult of Personality cover at the beginning, and like you said, the music choices, like, it's all really well done. It's very professional stuff, and it's a great, for someone who doesn't watch every Dynamite, like, it's great to look back and see all the stuff that's happened. So. Big treat.
Yeah, and we're looking forward to like the next topic, because his presentation of this has been really great. So,
and I hope he does. I wouldn't mind if he starts, pumping out in quotes, 40-45 minute videos like this. Like, that'd be great. Like, they don't need to all be 5 episodes encompassing years of feud. Like, if something cool happens, make a video out of it. Like, we'll be on board. We'll cover. I think we're committing to this point. I think we're going to cover every single one that happens. So
I don't see why we wouldn't.
Yeah. So if he keeps churning them out, we'll keep covering them. So we'll throw a couple page views his way at the very least.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yep.
Hopefully, podcast listenership.
Yeah, the Awesome Truth bump
converts to viewers. I also don't think he has to worry about viewership. These things have been doing well. So
yes, I think
better than Corey and Carmella on. I think so.
Better in quality and hopefully better in page views. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if the latter is true too, because given how shitty the numbers were on that episode 5 of Corey and Carmella.
Yeah. Sorry, to be clear, this was a kudos for Brian's work and outside interference, and also at the same time a slight to WWE.
a deep, meaningful slight to Corey and Carmella and WWE.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the benchmark of failure from now on.
But as we said, if you haven't watched it yet, if for some reason you're listening to this before watching, go to YouTube, look up Outside Interference, look up Better Than You, the complete CM Punk MJF feud. You will not be disappointed. It is 47 minutes well spent. And subscribe to Outside Interference. They have some very, very good stuff. And also subscribe to Awesome Truth if you haven't. We're available everywhere podcasts are. You should find us, subscribe to us, review us, like us, all the things you can do to get us out in front of the people. We really appreciate it. You can find our archives, as noted earlier, at awesometruth.libsyn.com, and you can follow us on social media, Twitter and Instagram, at awesometruthpod. Walt, great to talk wrestling, great to talk AEW, great to talk good. We had a couple stinkers in a row there, so it was nice to enjoy something that we both liked and talk about it and like actually get enthused and not in a ugh kind of way.
It's a great sign-off. Just great to talk wrestling. It's like, what did you expect?
Well, it's great to talk wrestling with you for these last 127 episodes.
Great to talk wrestling. You're right, we did.
Should that be the tagline for the podcast? It's great to talk wrestling.
I think it is. It's a treat.
It's a treat. We hope you had a treat listening to us as well. Thank you all so much. And remember, the truth will set you free.